I'm watching Liz. Hi, I'm Robert Pundicio, Senior Fellow here at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute with Greg Toppo, and welcome this afternoon. We're here to discuss The Game Believes in You by Greg Toppo, brand new book. And let me just start by mentioning the fact that if you are following on Twitter, we have a hashtag. It is Gaming to Learn. The 2 is a numeral, so that's gaming, numeral 2, learn. So you can send in your questions for Greg Toppo there, and we'll get to those shortly. Let me say a few words about this book, and I will confess right at the start, I wanted to hate this book. Sorry, Greg, but he knows this, and I'll explain why. I'm a bit of an ed technology skeptic, but I think I come by it honestly. If you spend any time in education, as we all do, then you have seen, as I have, one damn fad after another. It's always the next big thing. We've all been to the same conferences, yada, 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 disruptive, yada, 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 innovation, yada, 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 paradigm bursting, whatever. When people start to talk like this, my knee-jerk reaction is always to just check my wallet and make sure it's still on me. The signal-to-noise ratio around education technology has just been off the charts. I don't mean this to sound cynical, but has there ever been any field that has overpromised and underdelivered more than education? Has there ever been anything within education that has overpromised and underdelivered more than education technology? So I came to Greg's book, The Game Believes in You, with a bit of an arched eyebrow. That said, Greg is somebody whose work I have long admired, so I was not going to let on that I was this skeptical, but he knows me well enough to know that I'm not his target audience for this. So let me say at the outset that I'm not ready to completely abandon my skepticism about education technology and gaming, but Greg has written a strong and very persuasive book. Where he started to win me over is in not making the standard cliched argument about student engagement. In fact, I don't think that the phrase digital native appears once in this book, and that surprised me. Rather, he makes the case in the same way that I've tried to make the case for literacy, through the lens of cognitive science. And there's a passage here that I'll read. This is from the intro. It says, what looks like escapist fun is actually deep concentration. What looks like instant gratification is in fact delayed gratification in clever disguise. What looks like spectacle is a system that is training players to ignore the spectacle and focus on the real work at hand. What looks like anything goes freedom is submission to strict rules. What looks like a 21st century flashy high-tech way to keep kids entertained is in fact a tool that taps into an ancient way to process, explore, and understand the world. So score 1, Greg Toppo. Now, if I'm honest...
This is great so far. I'm waiting for the but.
There's always a but, Greg.
Okay, good.
I also, as a teacher, felt a little bit called out by this book. Now, I'm a bit of a traditionalist, I will acknowledge. So it felt like a bit of an accusation when I read these words. Because games look so little like school, they force us to reconsider our most basic assumptions about how children learn. What is school for, and what should students do there? Where should kids get their content and how? How important is it that they like what they're doing? What is our tolerance for failure? What is our standard for success? Who is in control here? Score 2, Greg Toppo. Ultimately and finally, I began to recognize some of my own favorite and most effective classroom practices and realized that they were not effective because I was a genius or even a good teacher. They were successful through the lens of Greg's book, because I had unwittingly, I now realize, tapped into what Toppo describes as the game layer, an overlay of game mechanics onto everyday tasks. So what was a time math drill in my classroom, if not with personal best records, if not a multi-level game? What was the daily oral language exercise that I like to do with my 5th graders, if not a puzzle that they enjoyed solving? The classroom economy, where all of my kids, a lot of teachers do this, had jobs for which they received paychecks. What was that if not a kind of Sim City? So the real aha moment for me then, and what's helping me overcome my antipathy to educational gaming, is my downright hostility, I will confess, to another fashionable educational idea, which is the myth of differentiated instruction. See, differentiation is the ultimate educational cure-all. It's the holy grail. It's perfectly fine for us to put 24 kids in a room at different levels of skill and educational attainment. All you need to do is differentiate. If differentiation is the flaw in most teachers, a custom, as I like to say, more, well, Shakespeare said it first and better, a custom more honored in the breach than the observance. When it comes to gaming, differentiation is not a flaw, it's a feature. A digital game is a differentiation engine. Score 3 for Greg Toppo.
I got a point for that?
Oh, absolutely. Well,
okay,
it was my aha moment. So here is the final passage I'll read, then we'll begin the conversation. Greg writes, "A well-designed game sits and waits and waits. It doesn't care if that wearisome math problem takes you 15 seconds or 4 hours. Do it again. Take all day. The game believes in you. Increasingly, it also knows you, or at least your abilities, better than anyone. At exactly the same time that schools have taken the questionable path of implementing more high-stakes standardized testing, key to the abilities of some imaginary bell curve student, games have gone the opposite route, embedding sophisticated assessment into gameplay in the process of becoming complex learning tools that promise to deflate the tired teach-to-the-test narrative that weighs down so many great teachers and schools." So I'm not ready to completely abandon my skepticism, but Greg Toppo has done the hardest thing to do, which is to convince somebody whose mind is made up to change his mind or at least look afresh at that. And with that, please welcome Greg Toppo.
Thanks.
You want to tell me I'm wrong about this? Or,
No, I was going to actually suggest we just go adjourn to the drinks.
The bar,
Quit while I'm ahead, man.
the bar is open.
Yeah, let's just...
A reminder that our hashtag, if you're following on Twitter, is gaming2learn, the numeral 2. You know what was fascinating?
By the way, can we also say my Twitter handles?
Greg's handle is gtoppo, at gtoppo, and the book is at Game Believes.
One word.
One word, thank you. You started out to write a book not about gaming at all, but about reading. Mm-hmm. Tell us what happened.
So and by the way, thanks for that wonderfully kind introduction. And I have more to say about it after I answer this one. But so I actually started out writing a book about reading. I had become obsessed with reading in America, obsessed with things like flat NAEP scores and these NAEP surveys that they give to kids that say, do you like to read in your free time? And of course, the numbers are just going sort of down and down and down. The percentage of kids who like to read was just sort of tanking. And this was at a time when my kids, I have 2 daughters, and they were both school age and both very smart. Neither of them really was interested in books. And there was just something didn't compute there. I thought, these are the kids we want our schools to produce. What is the missing ingredient? So as I say, I'm a journalist, so I started looking for somebody to blame. And I found blame everywhere. But eventually what I came away with was this sort of bigger exploration of media in kids' lives. And it got me really excited about a couple of things. I mean, this was a time when, we were talking about things like digital natives and digital immigrants and screen time, and we were worried about kids' social networking and, what was it, the MySpace suicide? I mean, this was like this was sort of this weird obsession we had about 7 or 8 years ago. And eventually, the more I looked at media and kids' relationship to media, the more I realized that I couldn't escape sort of this gravity of games. Games were becoming sort of an amazing cultural force that we just couldn't escape. And I remember I had taken a year off I got in a fellowship at Columbia, and I remember sitting in the office of my advisor saying, I don't know what it is, but I feel like I got to do something with games. I'm not even sure what there is to say, but it just feels big. So I started sort of scratching that itch and started reading about games, started playing some games. I bought my first Xbox. And there's a funny story about that too. And almost as soon as I started thinking about games, just plain old games, the kind of games, we play on our iPads and we play on our consoles and our computers at home, I started encountering teachers who were using games and teachers who were getting very excited about games. And what I saw that was probably cooler than ever was that it was a very bottom-up idea, that it wasn't somebody saying, you must play this game. It was a teacher saying, I'm playing this game. You really got to try it. So that was really exciting to me. And once I got that idea, once I got this idea that there's something different happening in school that I think a lot of people don't understand, then I was sort of off and running. And of course, you realize at the time that you know almost nothing about the subject that you're excited about, but it was enough to get started. And the thing that really cemented it for me was when I started learning about ideas like, and I talk about it very early in the book. So game theorists talk about something called hard fun. And what it is kind of what it sounds like. It's something you do that's fun, but it's very difficult. And when I started thinking about applying that to school, I thought, wait a minute, this is what we've been trying to do all these years, right? We've been trying to, as you say, get kids interested, get kids engaged, but we don't want to give up the rigor, right? We want our kids to compete with Finland, okay? But the only way they're going to compete with Finland is if they're engaged in that high-level work. And so I thought, this is like the first time I'm seeing somebody really talking about, a group of people really talking about both ends of the spectrum and thinking in a more holistic way about kids. So that was just tremendously exciting. And of course, by then, No Child Left Behind was in full swing. I didn't have to go into all the kind of unintended consequences. And I saw this as like this kind of remarkable but very little talked about piece of this that could really make a difference. And I'll just tell one very, very short story. I tell in one of the chapters about math, sitting next to this little fourth grader at a rocket ship charter school in San Jose. And I pulled up a chair behind him. I had no idea what he was doing. I didn't even know he was playing a game at the time. I was there for a totally different reason. Pull up a chair behind him. I kind of start staring at this kid's screen. He's playing on a desktop computer, playing this math game. And my jaw just drops. I'm like, holy crap, when did fourth grade math get this hard? And of course, I start sort of, he's having a little trouble with this problem, so I start suggesting an answer, and his friend comes over and he suggests an answer, and of course we're both totally wrong, and the kid's like, okay, whatever. But the moment that was really amazing to me, I had this moment where I said to him, trying to kind of curry favor, I said, this is really hard math. This is really something, dude. And the look he gave me was like, like, are you done? Can I get on with this? And it was really like a moving moment because it was like, like this is what we've wanted for so long. We've wanted hard work to be a natural part of our kids' days. And like, the risk of sounding kind of, goofy, this was the child that we weren't leaving behind, right? Like here he was in the flesh.
I have a lot of questions about the specifics of games, but the first one that occurs to me is not about the games, but the level of adoption. You've made a point of saying that you've discovered teachers who use this, and it's not top down. Just ballpark estimate, to what degree are teachers embracing this idea? To what degree are they not willing to give up that control that you write about? What's the state of play, no pun intended?
I mean, I think it's probably pretty safe to say that just about every teacher has used a game and probably is using a game at some point in their, in the year. I think there was some incredibly high number that I just saw recently, and of course the number I'm now forgetting, but it was, it was in the 80s, 90s.
Meaning electronic games, specifically.
Meaning, electronic games, not just, card games or chess or what have you. So I think in terms of that, the adoption is really heavy, and I think it's getting heavier all the time. In terms of percentage of teachers who use them all the time, I would say it's pretty low. But, I think it's early in the fight in a way. I mean, because and one of the things I talk about in the book is that the sophistication of the games that I would like to see, we're not really there yet. There are only a couple of good examples, and there's a lot of junk.
Just to orient us, give us some examples of the good, the bad, the ugly. What are you seeing that you think we need more of this and we need less of that?
I mean, you don't need my help to find the bad stuff. I'm sure if you're a parent, you've already found it. You go on the App Store, and you will find flashcards out the wazoo. Digital flashcards, absolutely miserable.
Which is, of course, the stuff that I would have used.
Right.
But, right.
Stuff that you would have used, like, and loved it?
No, probably assuming that, well, if you're going to make me do a game, I'm going to do something with caloric content and cognitive value, so I would have made a bad decision.
Right. Well, I think a lot of parents would make a bad decision. And the idea is that you want to, I mean, if you're going to adopt a game, if you're going to buy a game, you want something that you can't do, another way. So flashcards, there's nothing really exciting about that. I mean, the good stuff, I think, if we can stick to math, the good stuff is stuff that doesn't just review, games that don't just review the math you already know, but teach you actual math. Mm-hmm. I talk about one of my favorite games is this algebra game, and I'm happy to read you the segment because I think it's a really telling. It's a telling game because essentially what it does is it makes the claim, and I think it backs up this claim, that you can get a preschooler thinking algebraically. And it's not a heavy lift. And if you want, I can read,
Sure.
read that section. Let's do it from here.
If you know it from...
It's just 2 paragraphs.
He wrote it. He knows it.
I wrote it, yeah. So this is it's a chapter about sort of the possibilities of math games. Excuse me. And I talk a little bit. It's basically a profile of one of the guys who developed this game. But then at the very end of the chapter, the last 2 paragraphs, I describe the actual game. So now it's Greg playing the game. Okay. And it's an iPad game. So I say the game board is divided into 2 sides with your little dragon in a box on one side. It's called Dragon. Actually, let me back up a little. The game presents players with an odd little scenario. A mysterious box arrives for no apparent reason with a wide-eyed, omnivorous baby dragon inside, packed in straw. So your kid would love this, right? Also, for no apparent reason, the dragon wants to be alone. He must be alone before he'll eat. Don't ask, just play. The game board is divided into 2 sides with your little dragon in a box on one side. On both sides are cards, in quotation marks, random images, lizards, horned beetles, deep sea fish, and angry tomatoes. Again, don't ask. To win each level, you must touch and tap and drag the cards to get rid of all of those on the dragon's side. Once you do, he noisily eats everything that remains on the other side, and the level is done. Hey. The box is alone, the game declares. The game is strange, but you keep playing. Soon you're encountering night cards with darkened versions of the creatures that you learn will soon stand in for negative numbers. Pretty soon you're strategizing which cards to get rid of first. Order of operations, anyone? On level 12, one of the animal cards has mysteriously been replaced by a little black A. 5 levels later, there's a C. Finally, on level 18, the little wooden dragon box is momentarily replaced by a floating letter X. You're doing proto-algebra, and it's been about 3 minutes since you downloaded the game. This strange procession continues through 100 levels with no explanation or elaboration. Addition, multiplication, division, fractions, all of them appear without fanfare or explanation. You play 60 levels before an equals sign appears between the 2 sides of the board. By game's end, at level 100, you've moved seamlessly, baby step by baby step, from a cute baby dragon eating a spiky 2-headed lizard to this. This is actually in the game. 2 over x plus d over e equals b over x, which you solve fearlessly and perhaps even a bit impatiently in exactly 14 steps. You are 4 years old. So that's a pretty good
No,
example of a...
it's impressive, but can I ask, what evidence do we have, inevitable teacher question, that this transfers?
That it transfers to like real-life
Real
algebra?
algebra, yeah.
They're actually, the University of Washington has actually done some research, and the answer is yes, it transfers. They've done, I'm trying to remember exactly how many students they got playing this game, and I say it in the book somewhere, but it's basically in the millions of kids playing this game. They got actually a group of kids in Norway to solve algebra problems using this game, basically, starting with this game and then moving towards real live, on the ground algebra. And they ended up solving however many millions of problems. Maybe Eric knows, I don't know. I'm trying to remember the statistic, but it was essentially like 30 or 40% of the actual work was done off of school time. That is, kids playing it at home, after school. It's real algebra.
Can you describe, there was one chapter where you described a book or a game that was based on the book Walden.
Yeah.
Because having been an English teacher, this of course raises my hackles. Well, it's not the same experience, but
yeah.
Explain a little bit about how that game works, and then I want to ask you about games in different subject areas.
Sure. One of the chapters in the book is kind of coming back to this idea of, what can games do for reading? Which as you heard, this is kind of where I started. And I was very concerned about this. And so what I encountered at one point was a USC, very well-known game designer, USC game designer by the name of Tracy Fullerton. She's actually written textbooks about game design, very well regarded. She was obsessed with Thoreau and Walden, and she's a game designer. So she decides one day, a couple of years ago, that, okay, I am going to create a first-person Walden game. And I'm going to give players the opportunity to play as Thoreau at Walden. So what she did, and it's still in process, it's taken about 8 years. She actually created a 3D simulation of Walden using U.S. Geological Survey maps and Thoreau's own journals, and essentially she created Walden in 3D, and the game invites you to play as Thoreau. That is, decide what you want to do, right? Do you want to finish your cabin? Okay. You probably should finish your cabin if you want to stay out of the rain. Do you want to go fishing? Yes, let's go fishing because you're going to get hungry. And so essentially the way it's built is as this very big interlocking system in which you can try as hard as you can to live like Thoreau. Once you've finished your cabin and gone fishing, well, you've got some time. So maybe you should sit and read, or just enjoy the sunshine, or listen to the birds. But you could, if you wanted to, you could, as she says, you could be a Walden millionaire, right? And so you could plant acres and acres of beans. His first summer, Thoreau planted, way too many beans, and he complains about it in the book. And he says, I had way more beans than I needed. He made a little money, but he eventually decided, it wasn't worth the effort. So the idea is that you could do that. You could just raise the whole area behind the cabin and just plant acres of beans. But the question is, what would be the result, right? So you'd have all this money at the end, but how would what would the feedback be that the game would give you? And it might tell you, you're really not living like Thoreau would. He never would have done this. So the idea is that, the long and short of it is, and I understand how weird it is just hearing it described the way I'm talking about it, but the idea is that, and the hope is that it'll draw you back. If you're a kid or even an adult who hasn't read this book, you'll wonder, why is this like this? What is this system like? Why did he do these things? Tell me about, going to visit Emerson. Tell me about the railroad. Tell me about the fact that he burned down, part of the forest the summer before. And it would draw you into the book. Okay.
Well, and that's where I was going with this.
Yeah,
I mean, one, this is the part of the game argument that either loses me or frightens me, which is you're substituting the experience of the text for an experience that is using the text as an excuse for a game, so to speak. In other words, this is really not like the same as reading Walden. This is using Thoreau as a character. This is using Walden as a setting.
See, I guess I don't see it that way. I mean, I guess what I see it as, it's not either or. It's really one and then the other, right? I mean, the game is not a substitution for the book. And if anything, the game is an invitation into the book. The game, or vice versa, by the way. You know, the book could be an invitation into the game. I mean, I think I wouldn't put the book and the game on the same pedestal, but I would say, you know, one could help you access the other. I mean, the kind of the. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the broader question, I guess, is does gaming lend itself? I'm convinced on math.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm less convinced on English language arts. But I mean, you know me well enough to know I'm a big content literacy guy. To what degree? Where are the sweet spots for this in terms of the content areas, in terms of science, in terms of history, etc.? What's in your estimation? What are the rich veins of ore for content that we're just not making relevant to kids without the games?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would say almost all of every topic has a sweet spot that a game can hit. I mean, the ones that are being hit with greater regularity are things like math, and you know, I talked to Mike earlier about iCivics, the civics games, where you're basically essentially you're learning about a system. In this case, the system happens to be the Constitution, right? So essentially what it's doing is it's introducing you to this database that happens to be the U.S. Constitution. How do I get in? How do I get access to this thing? And that's really, to me, in the end, like I don't want to be like misunderstood when people read this book. Like, I am not a big gamer, and so many of the people I talk to for the book are not big gamers, right? I mean, there are some among them, but a lot of them really don't care much about games, and I think that's the point. Like, the game is not important, right? If it were some other tool that gave kids access to the material, that would be just as good, maybe even better. But the problem is we haven't had those tools with any real regularity yet. So it's just as a way to access the material, and it's a way. I'm not ignoring your question, by the way, but I want to make that clear. But things like math are easier to access with a tool like this. Things like history and data are easier to access like this. Physics, huge. Physics games are just incredible. I mean, I talk in one of the chapters about basically being gone on a physics game for hours and hours and hours. So I don't think there are any real weak spots yet. I just think it's a matter of where are the game designers' imaginations taking them? I'm pointing to this person off screen here, Eric, who's working for the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, and last year they put together a game jam where they basically invited game designers, this huge crew of game designers, to spend the weekend creating educational games. And I walked around this room, and I wish everybody could have been there, because it was the way these guys think is just almost 180 degrees from the way most of us think.
There's a line that I made a note of in the book, which, apropos of this, you wrote that many game designers were very smart people who didn't do well in school, so they felt a duty to rescue the next generation. Which I've heard George Lucas, by the way, say the same thing about Edutopia, and that was his whole different story, different day. But that's what's driving a lot of this. Is
I think so, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's the only thing driving this, but I think, these are people whose imaginations are, in this case at least, kind of driving them in the direction of, I did so badly in school, I hated school so much, how can I make it palatable for in a lot of cases, my kids? I mean, a lot of these guys are, and I shouldn't say just guys, a lot of these people are are becoming parents, and they're realizing, what the possibilities are.
We're going to throw it open to questions in just a few moments, and I want to remind that the hashtag is gaming to learn. If you've got a question for Greg Toppo on Twitter, that's gaming numeral 2 learn. Tell me the downsides. What are the limits of this? In other words, I'm always concerned about following good ideas off a cliff, educationally speaking, and it's very easy to see this becomes, games work, everything's going to be a game.
Yeah.
Is that the downside here? Or?
No, like I was saying, I really don't care about the games. I really don't. I think one of the things I think that people need to keep in mind is that, like, the teacher's judgment always has to be, like, first and foremost. I think the downside is really interesting. Like, there's a way in which, like, I really hope that gaming is not the next big thing in education, because the next big thing in education always sucks. It always fails, right?
Yeah.
So, like, part of me is thinking, like, I hope it's the next small thing, and it just, like, keeps going, right? Just like under the radar, maybe.
Right.
Keeping it away from like the real, like, the rule makers or something. I don't know. I guess the downside to me is there are a couple of downsides, and I feel like without, like, really good guidance, I think teachers could spend a lot of energy spinning their wheels on really bad stuff.
Well, that's what happens right now. We spend all this money on technology. We put it in the classroom and say, our work is here, is done, go teach.
Yeah, but I guess I feel like there are a lot of models there are a lot of good models out there that give teachers a vision of something really cool happening. Like, to me, if you take something like the iCivics games, which if you haven't played them already, you should. They're free, icivics.org. This was a group of games that was developed because Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor retired, and she realized that, like, people, not just kids, Americans, didn't know anything about law, didn't know anything about the Constitution, and she was really worried. So she commissioned this series of I think it's about 20 games now, and they're absolutely brilliant. They're really simple, they're really fun, and they're incredibly hard. You will, well, if you're like me, and maybe you're not like me, but you'll, like, laugh out loud trying to match the person who shows up complaining about their rights being violated to the amendment in the Constitution, and the clock is ticking, and if you don't do it fast, they're going to leave. So you have to somehow swallow this idea that free speech, First Amendment, right to bear arms, Second Amendment, and on and on and on and on. So there are great models out there, and I guess one of the things that I'm hoping with the book is, like, to give people, like, a working vocabulary about this stuff, so that they can say, if somebody says, I'm going to sell your district a game, or you and I are colleagues, down the hall, and you suggest a game to me, I have the vocabulary to say, well, does it do this, this, and this? Is it sticky? And all these terms that I talk about in the book. Then I think we'll be at sort of a better place. But I'm not really interested in, like, anything like taking over.
Okay.
Or so. I hope that.
Well, I said earlier that you had me at cognitive science, and that's what I find so persuasive. You spent a lot of time in the book talking to cognitive scientists about what makes these appealing, and by extension, I suppose, where we're failing to reach the same level of engagement in traditional schools.
Yeah. And it's not through lack of trying. I think it's just through lack of, like, knowledge.
We're just not that much fun as teachers.
We are not much fun as teachers.
Right.
Yeah, but I think most, I was a teacher. I think most teachers, like, if you ask them about their ideal day in school, it would be fun. They might not even use the word fun, but the adjectives they use to describe it would basically be the same as as the ones under the column fun.
Yep. In fact, a passage I mentioned,
Okay.
and I'll read it now. This was the one that really stood out to me. It says about all this.
Yeah.
The implications for school are in a way staggering. Imagine if every morning in every school, every child showed up and worked as hard as he or she could. Students would eagerly accept challenges that they know are not only suited to their abilities, but beyond them, trying repeatedly in the face of failure after failure, so engaged that at the sound of the final bell, they'd look up and wonder, where had the day gone? And I mean, that's obviously what we want as teachers, is to reach that moment which the game designers call flow, right?
Flow.
Right.
Yeah. And flow is flow is not a theory. Flow is a real thing. Flow is something we experience, with any luck when we're doing something we really love. And it doesn't have to be an electronic game. It can be gardening. It can be, laying carpet in our, in the spare room. I mean, it can be anything that we're. And the idea of flow is very simple. It's this zone between boredom and anxiety, right? Where our skills match the challenge, right? And when that happens, we just sort of, the work becomes invisible, right?
Right, and that's what we're supposed to, riffing on differentiated instruction again, that's what we're supposed to do for 25 kids, 25 different lessons at all times, which is obviously an impossibility, but this makes it, for the first time I looked at this and thought, okay, this could actually work.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what they're doing at Rocket Ship.
Yeah.
That's part of the theory there.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they're doing in a lot of places. And Rocket Ship is just the most sort of systematic, in a way, of a lot of the places that I've visited. But yeah, I think this is happening in a lot of places. But before we do questions, can I say one thing?
Please.
So, just getting back to your introduction. So, you said you, Robert, were not the person I had in mind when I wrote this book. I can now say that, Robert, you were the person I had in mind. I swear, I am not making this up.
Sign my copy?
Sure, of course. No, really, because I didn't want to write a book for advocates, for people who already love this stuff. That's not what I had in mind. I mean, what I had in mind was people who are skeptical about this stuff and who need to be convinced. Right. So I really want, maybe I needed that flow challenge of working really hard to get people like you, to agree with me. So anyway.
Well, mission accomplished. The hashtag is gaming2learn, numeral 2, and let's see if we have some questions. Do us the kindness of identifying yourself for our audience.
Sure. My name is Mark Nadell.
And sorry, we have a microphone. My apologies.
You're keeping track of time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. My name is Mark Nadell. I read about a third of the book this morning, and I don't know whether you addressed it, but I'm curious about the industry structure in terms of cooperation versus competition, for-profit versus non-profit.
Yeah.
Because teachers, I think of as being very cooperative. Hey, you could fix this and make it better, but I see Silicon Valley,
Right.
HBO, hey, we're going to steal this. We want
Right. It's a money-making enterprise. I mean, Silicon Valley.
Right.
Yeah.
What have you observed so far in terms of, are we doing it the right way to take advantage of cooperation, of improving each product? Because my understanding is the Japanese, you take a lesson and the teacher would give feedback, they'd work on it the next year, it would be better and it would be shared.
Right,
I
right.
think in Colorado, also that seems to be the ideal,
Yeah.
I think.
So you're talking about in terms of game design and game development?
Because it becomes a for-profit, it's like a textbook instead of just practices.
I think there are always going to be places that are just, sort of trying to generate profits. But I think that, to me, the thing that gives me sort of a little bit of hope is two things. Number one, as I said before, a lot of these people are having kids, and there is, for lack of a better term, sort of this charitable impulse, right? They want to create something that works. Now, they may charge a lot of money for it, but they want to create something that works. So in that sense, think about the things we pay a lot of money for that work in our lives. And I guess the other thing is, people aren't going to buy something if it doesn't really work well. And that's not something that you could have said 10 years ago, I think. I think teachers are developing a bit more of a sophistication about this stuff. And they're certainly, they're getting a lot more help. If I'm a teacher and I'm interested in games, there are a million places I can go now, really sophisticated clearinghouses, or where I can say, okay, I'm thinking of buying this. Will it work for this? No, it won't. It's too expensive, or what have you. So, I don't know if that really helps answer your question, but
I was just curious, like two different math teachers who are working on fourth grade math,
right.
and they discover each other. Do they say, let's work together, create, is that common, or do they, let me take from his and make mine better?
My reporting, I didn't encounter a lot of that. The teachers who were developing things were doing it on their own. They were sharing it with other people, but it wasn't so much a collaboration, if you will.
Wait, teachers creating games on their own? I can barely turn on my computer, let alone write software. How does that happen? I'm serious.
Yeah. I think in a lot of cases, like some of the cases I talk about in the book, they develop. It's something that they develop the skill to do. Some of these games are not that sophisticated, but they're more spreadsheet and database than Angry Birds.
No, I was going to ask actually, because one of the bromides I think in education is, we have to each create our own curriculum, customize it to the student. I'm guessing one teacher in 10,000, if that, has the ability to customize a game.
I think that's right. I think in terms of like something like a game you'd play on your iPhone, I don't think you're going to find teachers creating the next iPhone games. But I think you are going to find teachers creating tools that they can all share and they can all use. And I talk about a few of those in the book. Really simple stuff, but it gets the job done.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Peggy Siegel. Thank you very much for writing this book.
Sure.
Two quick questions.
You're welcome for writing this book.
One, have you seen examples where students are actually involved with teachers in designing the games from the get-go? And secondly, to reverse the lens of looking at this from the student perspective rather than from teachers, for the skeptics in particular. Have you seen where adults have job shadowed kids and redesigned games as an instructional model, so it's not the end in itself, but a means to improving learning?
I'm not sure about the second part of that. The first part of it, I would draw your attention to something that I report on when I spend a lot of time in this school in New York, Quest to Learn. And people are of many minds about this place. This was a school that opened 2009, I believe, in New York City. It started as a middle school. It's now middle and a high school. And it's very collaborative. Students have their hands in the material all day. And essentially the model is that they're sort of working, they're sort of whittling back on it now, but when it first opened, it had a full-time game design staff in the school, on the faculty. So a teacher would say, I'm teaching the Pythagorean theorem, or I'm teaching, the Bill of Rights. Help me figure out how to teach this in a game. So that was one of the things that was happening collaboratively. But also the students, when you're in an environment like this, students naturally are saying, wait a minute, I have a better idea. And so I think that happened to a great extent in a place like that. I don't know enough about, and I didn't do enough reporting to know whether the game design itself was happening in a big way in other places. But it's a really good question. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, which is a school like Quest to Learn, obviously it's a school of choice. You're not going to sign up for it if this doesn't interest you.
Waiting list now, by the way.
I'm not surprising. But if this is not a school of choice, do parents still have that the skepticism that I walked into, saying, "Wait a minute, my kid's in front of a screen all day looking at a game. What? This is school?"
No, I think that's a huge concern. And I guess one of the things that I'm hoping people will come away from the book with is this: that there's screen time and there's screen time. The screen time that you and I grew up with was watching Gilligan's Island reruns, okay?
That's exactly right.
That's a certain kind of screen time, right? And the screen time that our kids are growing up with is a very different phenomenon. As we've been sort of talking about, there's something active going on, and even if this is a very telling, tiny little example. The American Academy of Pediatrics for years and years and years has said, if you have a kid who's 2 or under, no screens, right? And now what they're saying, with the advent of the iPad, you can look it up. They're saying, if you have kiddos under 2, no screens. But if you have an iPad, this could be a kind of a cool mother-daughter, father-daughter, father-son thing.
Right.
You can sit with this kid in your lap, and you can interact. So if that, I mean, it's not ideal. It's not, playing with, blocks and, climbing a tree. But if that's the interaction you're having, if that's as a parent you prefer, okay, let's do it. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Just wait for the
The mic.
microphone if you would.
Hi, I'm just wondering if
What's
you
your name?
think Corinne Lesh. I'm just wondering if you think that games are going to get to a point where they're so pervasive in classrooms that you can actually tell how they impact student achievement. Did you find that at all in your reporting, or?
I mean, I think we already know how they impact student achievement. I mean, I don't know. We can't yet say, how they impact total student achievement because there's nobody really doing that. Even Quest to Learn, what I say in the chapter is that this is supposedly the video game school, and you look around and you can't find any video games because it's mostly like paper-based and cardboard and foam core. But I will say, like the places that are using games in a systematic way, I talk in the introduction about DCPS. They're seeing some real gains when schools take this stuff seriously. There's a hilarious moment in the introduction to the book where there's this little penguin mascot that appears in this game, and all it does whenever you solve a math problem, when you hit my answer is 6, enter, the penguin just walks, doesn't even walk, slides across the screen from left to right, and if the answer is right, it just disappears. If the answer is wrong, it bumps up against the obstacle that's been created and then turns around and goes back. So it's like this wordless cue. In the introduction to the book, the creators of this game commissioned a not even full size, like 10 times size, like a Mickey Mouse size, 6 foot high person in a penguin suit to come visit the schools that were using this game, and kids just went nuts. Like this penguin shows up, and kids they know who it is immediately, even though the penguin is this big on their screen. They're like, yes, it's Gigi, and they're like posing for pictures and hugging it, and this is really. So I mean, that's, and this one school that I talk about in the introduction had some of the biggest gains in math scores in any school in DCPS.
Is there a policy play here? If you're a policymaker, should you be looking at this through a certain lens?
I don't know. I guess to me the policy play is shut up and listen for a while. I don't know.
Oh, well, that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, that's going to happen. I guess just see what's out there. See what people are doing that makes sense. I think what the White House did, White House and the Education Department did with this game jam, I think was really significant. Forget the fact that the White House is inviting game designers to an actual official event. That's sort of, okay, we can think about that some other time. But, think about this idea that, they're really investing in, you could say the next generation of good ideas. I don't know. But I think the policy play is just create as big a list as you can possibly create of things that work, and make it accessible. Maybe I don't know.
Okay. To be continued.
Yeah.
Carolyn Hedges here.
Hi, I'm Caroline Henry from the Education Writers Association. I'm very interested in the issue of failure. You guys have talked about it and how antithetical the school system is to failing and, failing fast, failing often, that kind of idea. So I'm wondering in your reporting whether you saw places that are actually able to incorporate the concept of being able to fail and that being a good thing into their whole paradigm, and how that interacted with grades, if there's anywhere, because I think that it's so many schools, so many districts are very unforgiving when it comes to any kind of failure, in terms of grades. So just, I don't know, that's sort of open-ended, but
so
thanks.
I didn't see any places like any schools that have embodied this kind of failure outside of the games they're playing. So the short answer to your question is no, I didn't see any of that. Which is not to say that it doesn't exist. But I guess one of the things that was really interesting to me, one of the things that I did see was, and actually in a school that was piloting this program in Maryland, was basically a student management system that incorporated failure into the system in a much more thoroughgoing way. But in an interesting way, what it essentially, what it aspires to do is to replace grades, letter grades, with the performance of your group. And your group is 3 or 4 or 5 students who, in a way, you're sort of randomly selected. And essentially what it's doing is sort of leveraging and gamifying the idea of students working together, so that if you're not good at fractions and I am, okay, our group reputation is at stake. So I'm going to really work hard to help you do better at fractions. Or if you don't hand in a homework assignment, I'm going to do what I can to help you help you hand that in. So in a way, it sort of treats failure as in a different way. I mean, it treats it as sort of just a normal feature of school that we can remedy without, I mean, you almost want to say like, we don't need to talk about it. Okay, let's just fix it and give you another chance. Because I don't want to like make failure to be this wonderful, glorious thing. I mean, failure sucks, but it's really your response to it that's important, and yeah. I mean, if you fail in a video game, you just hit reset, and it doesn't take like 3 minutes to reset or a week to reset. And it doesn't say, you idiot, why are you resetting? It just resets and off you go again. That's the key.
Well, it's different than taking a test, and I think you make this point in the book as well, where I sit for a big test, I don't get my grade back for another week, and then I feel my dopamine rush, as it were, is either really delayed past the point of it being meaningful anymore, or I have to live with my failure, or I experience it a week later.
Right.
I mean, there's got to be a lesson in here for folks who, I don't know, let's say Park or Smarter Balanced, who are supposedly creating next generation assessments, but we're going to be waiting a long time for that.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a way to kind of I don't want to say replace this, but could the instant assessment that we get from gaming be a model?
Yes.
What would that look like?
I mean, I think it would look like.
Because I don't think we're going to get 50 states adopting Common Core games. Just a hunch.
I agree, and actually it gets back to your policy question, which is probably the best policy would be to stop using the word games, and come up with some other. Maybe we can we'll have a beer later, and we'll come up with a better word. No, I mean. One of the things I talk about very early in the book, and I just sort of touch upon it because it's really early in its development, is this idea that there's a group of, psychometricians and game designers, and I swear I'm not making this up, they are based at Electronic Arts in Silicon Valley, the folks who create, the games your kids know and love. There's actually a studio, behind the reception desk. I've been there. And they are creating, one of the things they're trying to do is to figure out ways to get content and assessment and put them in the same room and create a system where, the way I say it is to essentially do away with standardized testing as we know it.
But how realistic is that? I mean, the intuitive case makes sense.
Right.
But can you ever get to a point where someone will say, okay, getting to level 47 is the same thing as getting, an A- on?
And isn't that what you're doing when you're going through, a year's worth of algebra in your classroom? Aren't you leveling up? Like week 1 you took this test and you got a certain level. Week 2, you get to a certain level. Week 3, and on and on and on. Aren't you just leveling up in a way?
Well, yeah, I guess if you're asking the question in earnest, except that then at the end of the year you get a test about all the levels, not just the level you're at, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a psychometrician.
I mean, I would say some learning theorists would say, we need to tweak that system, and obviously, the stuff you learned in September, should come back in May. But I think a game designer would say the way you do that is to more holistically, maybe incorporate, the September stuff, more, seamlessly into what you're doing in May. I mean, I think there's a way to do it where, like any game player can see, that the stuff you learned at the beginning, yeah, you're applying it at the end. You're applying it when hell is breaking loose. So it's not that you forgot that early stuff. It's just being applied in a different way.
Got it.
So,
In the back.
yeah.
Hi, Ruth Wattenberg. Could you give an excellent description of the math game or the algebra game, and you talked about how there are a lot of games in physics, which I can imagine, but you really whizzed by the idea of the civics games and the history games, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what some of the best ones are.
So there's a really wonderful series, again free, that you could go home and play tonight. You don't have. I don't even know if you have to register for it. Called Mission US, Mission U.S. And these are this studio was one of the first studios that I ended up spending time with when I started researching the book. Fascinating group of people. They're based in New York, and they were initially funded by the public TV station there, WNET, and now they've gotten, federal grants like you can't imagine. I mean, they're really doing wonderful stuff. And what it is a very simple, I want to say flash-based, but they may not be flash-based anymore, role-playing game and it's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure where you're asked to play it. Like the first one, for instance, you're playing the role of a young boy right before and right after the Boston Massacre. Okay, and the task that's set before you is, which side would you like to be on? Okay, are you going to be on the British side? Are you going to be on the American side? And the questions that come up. I mean, I'm going to totally simplify and botch it, but the questions that come up are, okay, what happened at the Boston Massacre? Do we really know? People are saying all kinds of things. People are saying, it was just an accident. It was some punks. It was the trigger-happy British. You have to sift through all the evidence and figure it out yourself. Who can you trust? Who can you not trust? This really pretty girl, is a loyalist. Well, okay, that might not be so bad. So the idea is that for a lot of games like this, but especially for this series, you're embodying that role. And you're digging into that role almost seamlessly. I mean, from the moment you start this game, you're being asked to play that role. So the second one is actually even more vivid. You're playing as a young slave in Kentucky who escapes to freedom. And it is not a sure thing that you're going to be free. And actually, I talk in this one chapter about the AI, the artificial intelligence of this game, where they actually set it up so that, I can't remember what the proportion is, but, a great proportion of your attempts to escape are going to fail. You're going to be brought back to Kentucky. Okay, well, that's an interesting scenario to put a 12-year-old in. And it actually is an interesting little bit of news a couple of weeks ago where somebody took exception to that and said, wait a minute, slavery isn't a game. How can you wrap this terrible, awful, admittedly, thing that happened in our history and make it a game? And the game maker's response was, no, it's not a game, haha, Parcheesi, Monopoly, we're having fun. It's it's an embodied experience. Okay, so that's a really good example. They're actually working on a turn of the century New York Jewish life experience game now. So there's really interesting stuff. And these guys, they are not like flying by the seat of their pants. They have like historians on retainer. The great the example I give in the book. Do you mind if I? Just because I think it's just like really vivid example. Let's see. One of the designers said, let's see. So there's the third game was drop students into a northern Cheyenne settlement in the West in 1866. The designers insisted that all the Native American roles be voiced by authentic Cheyenne voice actors. It seemed like a good idea at the time, this one designer said, but there are only a few thousand Cheyenne left on Earth. And it was a safe bet, he joked, that few of them are trained voice actors who live in New York City. So it was these, authenticity was a big, big deal to them.
I have a list of topics at any given moment that I make a mental note that I want to learn more about this. And at the top of my list right now is, depending on how you define it, mastery-based or competency-based learning. Mm-hmm. And when I read the book, one of my thoughts was this would be a really good model for that. In other words, it's not seat-based, it's not grade-based, but this is a good way. The levels are a form of competency-based.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't actually know if I have much to say about that other than yes.
That might be a way in. Time for one or two more questions. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Hi, I'm Mary Patterson. I'm an Einstein Fellow with the Cyber Learning Program at NSF, and I'm also a middle school science teacher.
Great.
So my question for you is, in the classrooms that you observed, were the games being used as enrichment, remediation? Was it a centers? What was the level of embodiment in the classroom?
It really, in most of, and admittedly, I don't want to characterize what's out there because I don't really know what's out there other than what I reported. And what I reported, I spent 2 or 3 years reporting it, but it was just what I saw, you know what I mean? So I want to be careful to qualify it that way. What I mostly saw was that the games were not quite enrichment, but they were a way to extend the lessons. And sometimes they were a way to actually introduce the concepts, and then you get, and then you dig into it some other way. Like if you, for instance, this Mission US series that I was talking about, a lot of teachers will, okay, we need to do a unit on slavery or the American Revolution. Sometimes that's how they'll introduce the subject. Okay, let's embody this person. And actually, if you look on their site, it's really wonderful. Teachers have actually stepped forward and said, okay, I'm going to write a curriculum built around this. So it's not always 100% of the experience, if that's what you're wondering. Another really interesting model, though, and I talk about it in one of the chapters, is what the folks at Amplify are doing. Now, I know Amplify, it came off of this merger with News Corp, Rupert Murdoch. It is no longer under News Corp anymore, but so they have this fascinating model. And one of the reasons I wanted to write about them was because it was so audacious. What they've got is they've got this tablet-based curriculum. Okay, so most of your middle schooler's day is on the tablet. And what they decided was that the curriculum needed something to support it. So they've created 30 or 40 games that support the work. But one of the things they've said is teachers, and depending on who you ask, this is strict or not strict. One of the things they've said is teachers, you may not assign these games. Kids can do them if they want, but don't take the fun out of it. So it's just you can't assign it. It may be the key to homonyms or whatever topic you're teaching, but don't mess it up. And I think that's really thoughtful, because we do have this capability in this system to mess up the coolest things. And by the way, just so you know, because you're a teacher, So Amplify took that one step further, and they said, okay, it's not only going to exist on this tablet curriculum, we're going to sell them to the App Store, so you can now get maybe all the games. I can't remember if it was all of them or most of them, a la carte. So, and there's some amazing, amazing games.
Are they going to tell people don't download them? You'll ruin the fun?
No, well, maybe they might say to teachers, like, don't
Stay away. This is not
no
for you.
homework.
Yeah.
But as parents, you can get them, or as a teacher, you can just buy it just to check it out. There was one that actually they released. Well, we'll talk later.
One of the moments in the book that I just loved, and I was kind of kicking myself thinking, why didn't I think of this? I've forever struggled to get my students, both fifth grade and now high school seniors, to get more interested and engaged with current events.
Yeah.
And this was not a game, but there was a moment in the book where a teacher comes up, he's playing fantasy football, and he comes up with the idea of geopolitics, basically a
team of countries. Yeah. Fantasy
exactly.
geopolitics.
So you basically draft a team of countries, and you didn't go into detail, but I gather if there's an earthquake, if there's a political upheaval, you get points based on the amount of times your country is in the news.
In the news, yeah.
I'm like, damn it, why didn't I think of that?
Genius.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
And the funny detail about that is he didn't give them any instructions. He just said you're going to have a team of 3 countries. You can pick any 3 countries on Earth. And the first one everybody gravitated to was Djibouti. Because it sounded fun, what the hell do they do in Djibouti?
Now they know.
And what they realized was that Djibouti doesn't make news, so they traded it very quickly. And it was actually happening. The cool thing that happened when he was developing this, his timing was really perfect, because the first year or 2 that he started playing this game with his kids, Arab Spring started happening. And who would pick Tunisia? Right, if you didn't have to. But all of a sudden, Tunisia was like on the front pages of the New York Times.
Every day.
So the kid who, the night before went home and, started trying to get it, read a little bit of world news, was like, oh, Tunisia is going to pop.
Yeah.
Not to.
And this is, one of my serious takeaways from this book. This is the thinking that did not occur to me before. What you describe as the game layer of learning, which is
and the thing that I love that this teacher said, and I'm going to grab the book one more time. He just has this very quick little comment about that I loved, and it actually is the end of the section of this chapter. He says, so they didn't play this game all year. It was just a thing they did, part of their first semester. And they created a Facebook page on their own to follow the news, and they were basically getting into it. And so the teacher says, when the season ended, they went back to their old habits about reading about Miley Cyrus and all the other crap. This teacher said, but their Facebook pages, because he had invited them to upload these news feeds, were shot through with news from around the world. Quote, this sort of made my students the teachers, he said. Once we kicked off the game and they got into it, they were sort of coming into my classroom saying, hey, Nelson, it's his name. Have you heard about what's happening in Syria? And telling their classmates about these things too. It became a different kind of experience, and I became a little obsolete by choice, which I loved.
Yeah, and to be quite serious about it, this is, there's not a teacher alive who wouldn't want that reaction. So having banged my head against whether it's TV newscast, giving away time for kids, etc., and not having gotten that reaction, would I adopt that strategy to get my kids to be more engaged with current events? Of course I would.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't?
The funny little kind of kernel that I think is really interesting to think about is, educational technology, of which you're a skeptic, has always, in a way, aimed for what you want, which is, and this is the Larry Cuban thing, it's educational technology, whether it's a chalkboard or an overhead projector or a TV or slides or whatever, or a computer, it's always, the goal is to take the focus away from the teacher's voice, right? That's it. Anything you bring into the classroom, if it can do that, teachers will say, really, you can do that? It hasn't always worked, but that's something they've always wanted, because they're smart and they know that they're not like the only stimulus in the room, right? So anyway, it's a really fascinating idea, and I think a lot of this stuff has incredible promise. So.
Agreed. One last question, and I guess
look who gets
since
the last
the president of the Fordham
I will
Foundation,
pull rank. Yes. So Greg, it's super persuasive and compelling. So as a parent, I want to go home and download some great games for my 7-year-old. Has anybody figured out either a master place to list all of these by subject, or even better yet, to start rating them? Where do we go to find the best educational games?
So, I mean, there are a bunch of sites. I mean, the one that off the top of my head I think I'd lead people to would be Graphite. So this is a Common Sense Media thing, and this is exactly what they're doing. They're saying, okay, if I'm thinking of downloading, Monument Valley, how appropriate is it for my 7-year-old, right, or what have you? And it's for parents and teachers, by the way. There's no real divide, right? Because the assumption is, iPads are not just for teachers, right? You have an iPad too. So that's, I think, a really kind of a wonderful place to look. The Cooney Center, Jungann's Cooney Center, the folks, basically the think tank, the Sesame Street think tank, are doing some really interesting research on this. I think if you start with those places, you'll have a really good, kind of a solid beginning. And if you want, I mean, I'm happy to do this, to give you maybe even like a bigger list you can put on your website.
We accept.
Yeah.
The book is The Game Believes in You. He's Greg Toppo. Thank you. Well done.
How fun.